Greece is one of the most photographed countries in the world. Its images are instantly recognizable. White villages above blue seas, ancient temples standing against the sky, islands shaped by wind and light. But these images tell only part of the story. Beyond the postcards, Greece reveals a slower, deeper rhythm. A land shaped not only by beauty, but by time. Where mountains rise far from the coast, villages cling to stone, and everyday life unfolds quietly between ancient paths and modern streets. This is a country where history is not confined to monuments. It lives in landscapes, in architecture, in the way places connect to one another. From the heart of its cities to the silence of its mountains, Greece is a mosaic of worlds, layered, complex, and often overlooked. In this journey, we move beyond familiar images, not to chase what is already known, but to observe what lies in between. The spaces, the transitions, and the moments that define Greece beyond the surface. This is Greece beyond the postcards. Greece lies at the meeting point of continents, seas, and histories. Its geography is fragmented, shaped by mountains, peninsulas, and thousands of kilometers of coastline. No single landscape defines the country. Instead, Greece unfolds as a sequence of contrasts. Inland mountain ranges divide regions and communities. Stone villages rise above valleys, shaped by isolation and endurance. Here, distance is measured not only in kilometers, but in terrain, paths, passes, and seasons. Along the coast, the rhythm changes. The land opens toward the sea, forming natural harbors, cliffs, and islands scattered across the Aegean and the Ionian. Greece is often defined by its past, yet it cannot be understood through monuments alone. The country is a living system, shaped by climate, stone, and sea. A place where ancient foundations and modern life exist side by side. To move through Greece is to move between worlds, between coast and mountain, between openness and isolation, between what is remembered and what continues quietly, beyond attention. Athens is often described through its past. Yet the city is not a museum. It is a place in constant motion, shaped by centuries of change layered onto one another. Modern streets unfold beneath ancient hills. Apartment buildings stand beside ruins. Cafes fill spaces once marked by processions and markets. Here, history does not interrupt daily life. It surrounds it. The city grew outward from its core, adapting to geography rather than replacing it. Hills, rocky outcrops, and open squares continue to define movement and orientation. From almost anywhere in the center, the presence of antiquity remains visible, not distant, but embedded. Athens carries the weight of its symbolic role, yet it also reveals a quieter identity. Neighborhoods beyond the monuments reflect ordinary rhythms, morning routines, evening gatherings, the steady flow of everyday life. These spaces rarely appear on postcards, but they form the true continuity of the city. To understand Athens is not to isolate a single era. It is to recognize how layers coexist, how ancient foundations support modern structures, and how the city continues to evolve without erasing its past. Athens is not defined by a single moment in time. It is defined by accumulation. The Acropolis forms a constant point of reference. From streets, rooftops, and distant hills, its silhouette anchors Athens in place and time. The plateau was chosen long before the modern city existed. Its elevation offered visibility, protection, and permanence. From here, the landscape opens outward, toward the sea, the surrounding plains, and the hills that frame the city. Unlike isolated monuments, the Acropolis remains visually connected to everyday life. Traffic flows below, neighborhoods expand outward, yet the ancient structures remain unchanged in position and presence. They do not dominate through scale alone, but through continuity. At the center of the Acropolis stands the Parthenon, not as the largest structure, but as the most carefully measured. Its form is defined by proportion rather than decoration. Every line, every angle, every column follows a system designed to guide perception, subtle curves, slight inclinations, adjustments invisible at first glance. What appears symmetrical is, in reality, precisely corrected. The Parthenon was built to be experienced from a distance as well as from within. Its relationship to light changes throughout the day as stone surfaces respond to shifting angles and shadows. There is no single viewpoint that defines it. Time has altered the structure, but not its clarity. Fragments remain where complete forms once stood, yet the logic of the building endures. Even in partial form, its intention is readable. Unlike many monuments, the Parthenon does not rely on narrative scenes or symbolic excess. Its presence is architectural rather than illustrative. Meaning emerges through balance, restraint, and placement within the landscape. The Parthenon was never meant to stand alone. It was designed as part of a wider environment, connected to the city below, the horizon beyond, and the movement of people across space. In its silence, the Parthenon continues to communicate. Not through words or images, but through proportion and the persistence of stone. Far from the coast and away from large cities, the landscape changes abruptly. In central Greece, pillars of stone rise from the plain, shaped by erosion and time. Meteora is defined by verticality. Sheer rock formations dominate the horizon, separating ground from sky with little transition. Their scale alters perception, making movement slower and distances feel compressed. Long before roads connected the region, these rocks offered isolation. Their height created separation not only from surrounding settlements, but from the rhythms of everyday life below. It was this remoteness that gave Meteora its purpose. Monasteries were built atop the pillars, positioned where access was difficult and visibility wide. Stone structures blend into stone foundations, forming a continuity between architecture and landscape. From above, the view extends across valleys and fields, revealing how geography dictates settlement. Weather plays a central role here. Light shifts quickly, clouds move low across the rocks, and shadows reshape the terrain throughout the day. The environment is never static. Meteora is not defined by a single structure or viewpoint. It is defined by contrast, between openness and isolation, height and depth, permanence and exposure. Here, Greece feels distant from its coastal image. The sea is absent. Stone, silence, and elevation take its place. From the mountains of the mainland, the landscape opens toward the sea. Across the Aegean, the Cyclades form a scattered chain of islands, shaped by wind, light, and stone. Here, architecture responds directly to environment. Whitewashed houses reflect the sun, narrow streets soften the force of the wind, and settlements follow the contours of hills rather than grids. Everything is built with exposure in mind. The islands are often defined by their appearance, yet their character lies in repetition and variation. Villages share a common language of form, but each island adapts it differently, through scale, terrain, and proximity to the water. Movement in the Cyclades is slow and deliberate. Paths lead upward from harbors, opening toward terraces and viewpoints that reveal the sea in fragments rather than panoramas. Horizon lines remain constant while foregrounds shift. Despite their visibility, these islands are not uniform destinations. Beyond the familiar images, everyday life continues quietly, shaped by seasonal rhythms, limited resources, and long-standing patterns of settlement. The Cyclades represent one of Greece's most recognizable landscapes. But beyond the surface, they offer something less immediate. A balance between exposure and shelter, openness and restraint. Santorini is one of the most recognizable islands in Greece. Its white villages and volcanic cliffs have become global symbols, repeated across images and media. Yet beyond the viewpoints and terraces, the island reveals a more restrained rhythm. Settlements extend inward, away from the caldera, where daily life follows quieter patterns. Here, architecture serves function as much as form. The island itself is defined by geology. Volcanic stone shapes the cliffs, the soil, and the contours of the land. Vineyards grow low to the ground, arranged in circular patterns to resist wind and retain moisture. Movement across Santorini is shaped by elevation. Paths descend sharply toward the sea, while villages rise above it, separated by slopes rather than distance. While its image is widely known, Santorini's landscape is not static. Light shifts across dark rock, shadows stretch along the caldera, and the sea below remains in constant motion. These elements exist regardless of attention. Beyond the postcards, Santorini is not defined by spectacle alone. It is defined by terrain, adaptation, and the quiet continuity of life beyond the frame. Naxos reveals a different side of the Cyclades. Unlike islands defined primarily by their coastlines, Naxos extends inward, rising steadily from the sea toward a mountainous interior. Here, the landscape changes within short distances. Beaches give way to valleys, stone terraces, and villages positioned along old routes. Elevation creates variety, allowing agriculture, pasture, and settlement to coexist. The island's scale supports continuity. Communities are not confined to the shoreline, and movement flows naturally between coast and interior. This balance shapes daily life, reducing reliance on a single focal point. Architecture follows terrain rather than spectacle. Villages cluster around slopes, oriented toward shelter and access rather than views alone. Stone, white surfaces, and narrow streets reflect both tradition and practicality. Naxos feels less compressed than other islands. Space opens between settlements, and the horizon shifts gradually rather than abruptly. The island's presence is expansive, yet understated. In Naxos, the Cyclades appear not as isolated outposts, but as living landscapes, places shaped by geography, not by image. Paros sits low between sea and sky. Its landscape is shaped less by height than by exposure, to wind, light, and open water. Settlements remain close to the coast, yet rarely turn fully toward it. Instead, villages are positioned slightly inland, where stone walls and narrow streets provide shelter from constant movement of air and sun. Here, architecture is defensive in its simplicity. The island's terrain is gentle, but never flat. Rolling hills descend toward bays and harbors, creating transitions rather than borders between land and sea. Movement feels continuous, without abrupt changes. Wind defines daily rhythms. It shapes vegetation, influences routes, and determines when the sea opens or closes itself to travel. Water, stone, and air exist in constant negotiation. Paros does not rely on singular landmarks. Its character emerges through repetition: harbors, paths, beaches, and villages, arranged along a shared logic. So nothing dominates the view, yet everything contributes to balance. In Paros, the Cyclades reveal their quieter structure, an environment where restraint, not scale, defines presence. Milos is shaped by geology more than by settlement. Volcanic origins define the island's form, carving cliffs, coves, and coastlines into irregular patterns. Here, the sea meets land without symmetry. Rock formations shift abruptly, colors change with mineral content, and beaches emerge where erosion allows access. The coastline feels exploratory, unfolding through fragments rather than continuous stretches. Villages remain modest in scale, positioned where terrain permits stability. They do not dominate the landscape, but adapt to it. Movement follows natural curves, tracing the edges of hills and inlets. Light plays a central role. Reflections shift across pale rock, darker stone absorbs shadow, and the sea amplifies contrast. The island's appearance changes constantly, without altering its structure. Milos does not present a single image. It offers variation in texture, form, and perspective. Crete stands apart from the rest of Greece. Its size alone changes perception, compressing multiple landscapes into a single island. Mountains rise sharply from the coast, forming natural barriers that divide regions and traditions. Plains open between ranges, supporting agriculture and settlement, while gorges cut deep paths toward the sea. Distance here is not measured by coastline, but by elevation and terrain. The island's geography creates variety. Northern shores are shaped by harbors and towns, while southern coasts remain rugged and exposed. Inland, stone villages reflect older patterns of movement, tied to land rather than water. Crete has long existed as a crossroads. Its position between continents influenced trade, conflict, and exchange, leaving layers that remain visible in architecture and settlement. Yet despite its history, the island's defining force remains its landscape. Movement across Crete is gradual. Roads wind through passes, descend into valleys, and follow coastlines where the land allows access. Transitions are slow, and scale becomes apparent only over time. Crete does not present a single identity. It contains many, coastal and mountainous, open and remote, ancient and lived in. In the heart of Crete, the landscape narrows. The Samaria Gorge cuts through the White Mountains, forming one of the island's most dramatic natural passages. Rock walls rise steeply on both sides, shaping a corridor defined by height and compression. The path follows the terrain closely, adapting to stone rather than altering it. Movement here is guided, not chosen. Light enters unevenly. In some sections, the gorge opens wide, revealing sky and distance. In others, the walls close in, reducing visibility and sound to a minimum. This alternation defines the experience. Water has shaped the gorge over centuries. Seasonal flows carve depth and direction, leaving behind smooth surfaces and sharp edges. Vegetation appears where conditions allow, growing directly from rock and shadow. The gorge connects interior mountains to the southern coast, functioning as a natural route rather than an isolated landmark. It reflects how geography dictates access, passage, and settlement across Crete. In Samaria, scale becomes tangible. The landscape is not observed from a distance, but entered. A space where movement reveals form, and silence reinforces presence. At the far western edge of Crete, the landscape opens abruptly. Balos Lagoon lies between sea and land, shaped by shallow water, pale sand, and wide horizons. Unlike the island's steep coasts, Balos unfolds gradually. Water remains calm and translucent, revealing sandbanks and shifting color beneath the surface. Depth is minimal, yet space feels expansive. The lagoon exists in a state of transition. Tides, wind, and light continuously alter its appearance, redrawing lines between land and sea. Its presence is purely spatial, a meeting point of elements rather than a destination shaped by human design. Here, Crete reveals its coastal contrast, a place of clarity and openness, where landscape takes precedence over structure. Chania unfolds around its harbor. The curve of the waterfront defines the city's orientation, guiding movement along the edge between land and sea. Layers of history remain visible in stone and layout. Venetian walls, narrow alleys, and restored facades coexist within a compact space, shaped by centuries of adaptation rather than expansion. The city grew inward, constrained by geography and fortification. Away from the harbor, streets narrow quickly. Shadows deepen, surfaces change, and movement slows. Here, daily life continues at a quieter pace, removed from the openness of the waterfront. The relationship between city and sea remains constant. Boats drift in the harbor, reflections shift across water, and the sound of movement carries through connected spaces. The coast is not separate from the city. It is part of its structure. Chania does not present itself through grand scale. Its character emerges through proximity, detail, and continuity. A city defined by transition rather than spectacle. In Chania, Crete's urban life reflects the same balance found across the island, between exposure and shelter, between movement and pause. In the northwest of Greece, the landscape shifts once more. Epirus lies far from the islands and the open sea, shaped instead by mountains, rivers, and long distances between settlements. Here, geography defines isolation. Mountain ranges form natural borders, valleys remain narrow, and movement follows ancient routes carved by terrain rather than design. The sea feels distant, both physically and culturally. Stone dominates the environment. Villages are built from local materials, blending into slopes and ridges rather than standing apart from them. Architecture reflects necessity, durability, shelter, and adaptation to weather. Rivers cut deep paths through the region, creating gorges and crossings that have shaped travel for centuries. Bridges appear where access was possible, connecting communities across difficult ground. Each structure marks a point of passage rather than permanence. Life in Epirus follows seasonal rhythms. Winters are harsh, summers brief and clear. These conditions shaped settlement patterns long before modern infrastructure arrived. In Epirus, Greece reveals a quieter identity, one defined not by coastlines or ancient monuments, but by endurance and continuity within a demanding landscape. Scattered across the mountains of Epirus, the Zagori Villages form a network rather than a single destination. Their placement follows terrain, water sources, and routes shaped long before modern roads existed. Stone defines everything here. Houses, paths, and bridges are built from local material, blending into slopes and forest edges. Nothing appears imposed on the landscape. Each structure feels anchored to its surroundings. Arched stone bridges span rivers and ravines, marking points of connection. They were built to endure seasonal floods and changing conditions, serving movement rather than display. These crossings reveal how geography dictated interaction between settlements. The villages themselves remain compact. Narrow streets and clustered buildings provide shelter from weather and isolation from open terrain. Life unfolds inward, shaped by proximity rather than expansion. Time moves differently in Zagori. Change arrives slowly, and traces of earlier periods remain visible without restoration or emphasis. The landscape absorbs human presence rather than highlighting it. In these villages, Greece feels grounded and restrained, a place where continuity matters more than transformation, and where landscape and settlement exist in quiet balance. Near the Zagori Villages, the land opens into depth. Vikos Gorge cuts sharply through the mountains of Epirus, forming one of the deepest canyons in Europe relative to its width. The scale is revealed gradually. From above, the gorge appears as a narrow incision in the landscape. Only with movement does its depth become apparent, as rock walls drop away and the valley floor disappears from view. Vegetation clings to the slopes where conditions allow. Trees, shrubs, and grasses adapt to changes in light, moisture, and exposure, creating visible layers across the rock face. The environment shifts with elevation rather than distance. Sound behaves differently here. Wind moves along the cliffs, water remains far below, and silence dominates wide sections of the gorge. The absence of noise amplifies scale. Vikos is not shaped for passage. It resists easy movement, reinforcing separation rather than connection. Its presence defines the region not as a route, but as a boundary. In the gorge, Greece reveals a landscape shaped without compromise, a place where form follows geology alone, and where human presence remains peripheral. And mountain rising above northern Greece, Mount Olympus stands apart through scale alone. Its height and isolation separate it visually from surrounding landscapes, creating a natural landmark long before it gained symbolic meaning. The mountain slopes transition gradually. Lower elevations are shaped by forest and water, while higher ground becomes increasingly exposed. Routes around the mountain follow natural constraints, shaped by valleys and passes. Movement here is vertical as much as horizontal. Changes in elevation bring changes in climate, sound, and light within short distances. The mountain feels layered rather than singular. Mount Olympus reveals how geography can shape meaning without design. A landscape that stands independently of interpretation, grounded first in stone and scale. South of the mainland, the Peloponnese unfolds as a world of its own. Though connected by a narrow isthmus, the region feels distinct, shaped by mountains, valleys, and a deeply indented coastline. Here, Greece reveals its continental scale. Interior ranges divide the land into separate zones, while coastal plains open toward sheltered bays and natural harbors. Movement follows geography, tracing routes shaped long before modern infrastructure. The landscape alternates between openness and enclosure. Fields and plateaus give way to rocky slopes and forested hills, creating a rhythm of transition rather than uniformity. Each area feels self-contained, defined by terrain rather than distance. The Peloponnese carries visible traces of antiquity, yet its character is not limited to monuments. Villages, roads, and agricultural patterns reflect long continuity, shaped by land use more than by image. Coastlines vary sharply. Some shores open wide toward the sea, while others remain abrupt and rocky, limiting access and shaping settlement. The sea is present everywhere, but never dominant. In the Peloponnese, Greece feels grounded and expansive at once. A region defined by structure and scale, where landscape sets the tempo. Nafplio sits at the edge of the Peloponnese, where land and sea meet without urgency. Its position along a sheltered bay has shaped the city's form, guiding development along the waterfront rather than away from it. The city unfolds gradually. Neoclassical buildings line the lower streets, while older structures climb the hillside above. Fortifications remain visible, marking earlier boundaries and orientations. Movement through Nafplio is compact and contained. Distances are short, streets narrow, and the sea remains within sight from many points. The city feels scaled to walking rather than expansion. Unlike larger urban centers, Nafplio does not overwhelm its surroundings. Its architecture follows proportion rather than dominance, allowing open views toward water and hills beyond. Nafplio represents a quieter expression of Greek urban life, a place shaped by position, balance, and the enduring relationship between city and sea. In the interior of the Peloponnese, the landscape opens into gentle slopes and forested hills. Here lies Epidaurus, a place shaped as much by geometry as by terrain. The ancient theater is positioned with precision. Its semicircular form follows the natural incline of the hillside, integrating structure and landscape into a single system. Nothing appears imposed. Everything responds to slope, distance, and line of sight. Sound defines the space. The design allows even the smallest movement at the center to carry across the entire seating area. This acoustic clarity emerges not from technology, but from proportion and placement. Stone seats follow the curve of the hill, creating a rhythm of repetition and order. From above, the theater reads as pattern. From within, it becomes experience. Surrounding forests and open ground isolate the site from modern development. The environment remains quiet, reinforcing the sense of separation from everyday movement. Here, attention is directed inward rather than outward. Epidaurus demonstrates how architecture once worked with landscape rather than against it. A place where function, form, and environment align without excess. At the southern edge of the Peloponnese, the landscape hardens. The Peninsula stretches toward the sea, shaped by stone, wind, and exposure. Here, terrain offers little softness. Rock dominates hills and coast alike. The environment feels exposed, with little separation between land and sea. In Mani, Greece reveals a harsher edge, a place where survival shaped form and where geography dictated culture as much as history. Along the edges of the mainland and the islands, the Aegean defines Greece through movement. Its coastline is fragmented, shaped by cliffs, inlets, and long curves that rarely follow straight lines. Here, land and sea interact constantly. Rock formations interrupt the water, while bays open unexpectedly between headlands. The coast is never uniform, always shifting in scale and exposure. Light plays a defining role. Reflections move across the surface of the sea, while cliffs cast long shadows that reshape the shoreline throughout the day. Color emerges gradually. Muted stone, deep blue water, pale horizons. These shores are not places of arrival alone. They function as transitions between regions, between land and openness. Movement follows the coast rather than crossing it, revealing details slowly rather than all at once. Settlements remain secondary. Harbors and villages appear where geography allows access. But vast stretches remain untouched by dense development. The landscape leads, and human presence adapts. Along the Aegean, Greece feels expansive, a country defined not by borders, but by the continuous dialogue between stone, water, and light. Along the coast, harbors form points of stability. They offer shelter from open water, shaping settlement patterns and daily routines. Fishing villages remain closely tied to these protected spaces. Boats rest along stone quays, nets dry in the sun, and movement follows tides rather than schedules. Life here is oriented toward the sea, but not dominated by it. Architecture reflects practicality. Buildings cluster tightly, creating wind protection and shade. Streets are narrow, shaped by use rather than planning, leading naturally toward the water. The pace is measured. Mornings begin early, afternoons slow, and evenings draw activity back toward the harbor. Sound carries easily. Water against hulls, distant conversation, the steady rhythm of work. These villages do not aim to impress. They exist as functional spaces, shaped by continuity and necessity. Their presence is modest, yet enduring. In these coastal settlements, Greece reveals a lived relationship with the sea, not as spectacle, but as routine, a quiet balance between land, water, and time. Across Greece, water is never static. Wind shapes the surface, currents define routes, and movement follows conditions rather than intention. Boats cross open stretches slowly. Distance feels extended, measured by horizon lines and changing light rather than by speed. The sea dictates pace. Sails adjust, engines hum quietly, and waves form repeating patterns that blur time. Movement becomes continuous rather than directional, reinforcing the sense of openness. The relationship between land and sea remains visible. Coastlines appear and recede, cliffs dissolve into distance, and islands rise gradually from the water. Greece is often understood through its images: white villages, ancient temples, open seas. Yet beyond these familiar views lies a deeper continuity, a country shaped by geography, movement, and adaptation, where landscape and life remain closely connected. From mountains to islands, from stone villages to open water, Greece unfolds gradually, not as a collection of highlights, but as a sequence of environments shaped by time. Beyond the postcards, Greece is not defined by spectacle. It is defined by balance between exposure and shelter, stillness and movement, past and present. A place experienced not only through what is seen, but through what remains quietly in between.